This story has many variations. I'm going to do my best to tell them all. I know this story is told in the second person, but realize that the you I'm referring to is a hypothetical you. Sometimes you're on a beach, sometimes you're in a forest, sometimes you're in a nondescript wilderness. But the important thing is that you are alone in nature. This is how the evangelism attempt starts. You're asked to picture yourself in a secluded place away from civilization and all it has to offer. You're walking along when all of a sudden you see a watch in the sand, on the ground, or on the path. Whichever setting it is, you find a watch in it. The watch stands out because there is nothing else around like it. The evangelist is getting excited as he tries to remember how this apologetic goes. You see the watch, and your first thought is, this watch is incredibly complex. It has an incredibly complex design that wouldn't have come about by chance. This watch must have a designer. While the evangelist goes on, you're wondering to yourself, is that really what I would have thought? I must have been in a very philosophic state of mind because I'd probably think, lucky me, a free watch. Or, maybe someone lost a watch. I should turn this into Lost and Found. You can see how the evangelist is trying to steer your thoughts to the conclusion he wants you to reach. And you're starting to suspect a word game. The evangelist says, you'd be a fool to think that the watch came about by accident. It has gears, hands, batteries. It is a symphony of working parts, and if you take away just one piece, it all falls apart. Now imagine that you were walking down the same path and you come across a human eye. Holy smokes, the avatar of you in your imagination says. I found an eye. Someone lost a fucking eye. What injured this person that caused them to lose an eye? Am I in danger here? All alone on this path? I don't know which is scarier, the fact that someone out there is missing an eye or the fact that this eye is missing the rest of the person it belonged to. Is this the same guy that lost the watch? Is he looking for his eye? It's really heartbreaking to think that there is a blind person out there looking for their eye. The evangelist continues his story, oblivious to the way that normal people think. And you look at the eye and think to yourself, this eye is also of an extremely complex design. It is designed so that if you're missing just one piece, it wouldn't work. Well now, you think to yourself, this eye has all the parts and it isn't working at all right now. The avatar of you inside your imagination must be extremely uncaring about the plight of his fellow hypothetical human being, who seems to be losing things left and right along this path. But then you remember back to your biology class and think to yourself, wait a second. There are nearly 6 million cone cells in my eye. I could take away hundreds of those and my eye would still work perfectly without any noticeable difference. The evangelist keeps plugging along, trying to get through the script before you interrupt with questions or protests that would steer the conversations away from the conclusion of God exists. The eye must have had a designer. Now a whole flood of protests burst forth to the forefront of your brain. My eye has a designer. What, my mother's uterus? No, the evangelist says. God is the designer. Look around and see how complex the entire universe is. The sun heats up the planet and plants take energy from it. And those plants in turn feed you. Look at the water cycle, how seasons come and go, how the moon affects the tide. It is all so incredibly complex. It's all here so that you can survive. It must have had a designer. That designer is God, and he loves you and wants you to know him. He's given us the Bible, his perfect words, so that you can come to know him and love him. You see, God created us perfect, and... The evangelist launches into his favorite 2-minute version of how your great-grandmother is responsible for everything evil in the universe because she ate a fruit, and how God decided to kill his own son, self. And the reason he scapegoated his son, self, was so that everything bad you've ever done would be made better because he loves you. Or maybe the evangelist goes into his favorite 2-minute version about how an angel came down to visit Muhammad, peace be upon him, to spread the perfect and uncorrupted word of Allah, so that all peoples might subject themselves to Allah. You stop and think about what the person had to say, and then say, I'd like the past 4 minutes of my life back, please. The evangelist looks at you, confused. This is not the promised result his pastor promised him. You were supposed to ask more about Jesus, ask if he would go to church with you, or just pray to Jesus right then and there to become saved. What do you mean? Simple, you say. Why did I even notice the watch in the first place? The evangelist isn't tracking. Because it stood out. It didn't belong there. It is something obviously designed in the middle of nowhere. You sigh. And then explain, no. What I should have seen is a watch among a multitude of watches. It shouldn't have stood out. The evangelist is beginning to wonder if you were even listening. Were you even listening? I said that you only saw one watch. You try to explain things more simply. No. What I saw was something so incredibly complex that it must have been designed. It stood out to me because nothing else around me in this beach, forest, or wilderness was anything like it. If what you said about God is true, then everything I was seeing that day should have looked exactly like the watch. Obviously designed. If that's the case, the sand on the beach should look like it's obviously designed. The water off the shore should look like it was obviously designed. The sun in the sky should look obviously designed. All of these things are supposed to be like watches. They are all supposed to be obviously designed. You're saying I saw a watch amongst a sea of watches and thought it was special because there wasn't anything else around like it. You're saying that all those other things weren't obviously designed. And that's why the design of the watch stood out. The evangelist tries to justify how the watch opened your eyes to see how all things are designed, but you're just not having it. Listen, you say. Your unsubstantiated myth about the creation of the universe might be very old and very famous, but it doesn't hold a candle to what peer-reviewed scientists have to say about the universe, the planet, the hypothetical beach forest wilderness, how the evolution of the human eye came about, and those claims are substantiated. Even if what you say about a designer is true, there's no reason to assume that your particular God is that designer. In short, evangelists, stop using the watch argument to prove a designer. Stop using the computer argument to prove that your God exists. Stop talking about a hurricane in a junkyard assembling a perfect Boeing 747. Every time you use these arguments, you're proving yourself ignorant about evolution, abiogenesis, Big Bang cosmologies, and ideas from any 7th grade science class. You end up looking ignorant and silly at best, dishonest and manipulative at worst. Every time you say that these parts wouldn't auto-magically come together to form a fully functional eye or a fully functional watch, the educated members of the conversation can't do anything but wait for you to realize that that is not what we are saying at all, but instead, that is exactly what your religion is trying to claim. Unless you'd like to explain how dust becomes a man in less than a day without the use of magic, or how a rib becomes a woman without the use of magic, then you're disproving your own theory. You've already disproved your own designer theory with your story about the designed watch in the middle of the undesigned wilderness. Disproving the idea that things don't automatically come together is just tautologically redundant.